Hey y'all, welcome back to episode 2 of Boundaries and Bullshit. I am your host, Jovan Williams. It's been some time. I have been just trying my best to get settled and get my bearings because life has been lifing, okay? But let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. For today's bullshit, many of you know that I recently relocated, and in that process, I started researching different um, moving companies. And I do my best to support Black owned businesses when I can. Um, you know, my real estate agent recommended somebody that she knew. I wanted to go ahead and try them out. I originally spoke to the person. He gave me, a pretty good price. And he seemed like a very nice, older Black man, Southern gentleman. And I know that that can come with some other things, right? So the first couple phone calls went well. He was very old school, very analog, didn't have, like websites, things like that. But I wanted to try to save some money, also wanted to try to support a Black owned business. However, as I was going through the different moving companies, I was comparing, the different services and also the way that I was treated. And so this business, during one of our last phone calls, we were, strategizing as far as how we were going to move out of state, things like that, what the schedule would look like. And so I mentioned, like, okay, well, this is what's happening at this time. So, maybe you guys can grab something to eat and I'll be ready. And so, in response to that, he said, "Oh, I thought you were going to cook for us." And I paused and I was like, "Excuse me?" And he was like, "Yeah, I thought you were going to cook for us." And he said it jokingly, but then it continued. And I was like, "Well, no, I'm not that type of woman." And he was like, "What, you can't cook?" And I was like, "Yes, I can cook when I want to cook. I'm paying you for a service." And he's like, "Oh, well, my worker's going to be disappointed that you're not cooking for us and all this other stuff." And I'm like, he's a little too comfortable, right? And so, yes, this is a Black owned business. Yes, it's family run. Yes, I want to support. However, I want my services minus misogyny. Okay. And so, and it bothered me. I think this was like a Thursday or Friday. It bothered me throughout the entire weekend that this exchange had happened, right? Because after he saw that I was not budging on my boundary, he, jokingly said something and, got off the phone, but it left a very bad taste in my mouth when it came to supporting this business. And so, yeah, so I'll tell you the rest later on that situation. But I pretty much went ahead and decided not to go with that company because I'm really working on um, sitting with my intuition and listening to those nudges. And also, once again, like I said in the first episode, not playing about me. And so people will have to reap those consequences, and it's not on me to try to save people from the consequences of their actions. So yeah, that was today's bullshit: misogyny and misogynoir. So segment 2, what had happened was, so the name of this episode is double consciousness. So it was originally a term that was coined by W.E.B. Du Bois in the early 1900s in his book, The Souls of Black Folks, right? So I originally learned about this concept when I was at North Carolina A&T State University, taking African American experience, I believe, and we touched on it. And it was a way that he thought that Black folks had to survive the brutal realities of racism and how we had to learn how to live in two different worlds, right? So while slavery was abolished, we had to be in these different worlds in order to survive. So we were the working class. So we had to figure out how to exist in the white world and then also how to exist in the black world. Where a lot of people may think that there's only one world that exists, there's many of us from marginalized communities, whether you are considered BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, um, gay, straight, well, not straight, but gay, women, things like that. There are certain ways that we may have to show up in certain environments in order to survive. And so it made me think about um, just the ways in which we have to be hyper aware of ourselves and kind of dumb down who we really are for the sake of surviving sometimes very hostile environments. And that made me think about my childhood and growing up. And, I'll continue to talk more about this and tell more stories about this. But I grew up in St. Louis City, and St. Louis City was predominantly Black and working class. A lot of individuals were impoverished, and I lived amongst that, right? So that was one world, that was my home world. But then my other world was going to a predominantly white school district that was called Brentwood. It still exists today. But not nearly as many Black folks are out there as there were back in the early 90s or early to mid 90s. And so, um, yeah, so they had a program that was called DSEG, short for desegregation. And this was an effort to desegregate the schools. So this was still happening well in, through the 90s and the 2000s, where Black students were bused to um, local suburban schools that were right outside of the city in order to meet like integration quotas. And the school districts received money for us being out there. But of course, that came with its own set of challenges, right? So when we think about Ruby Bridges and her integrating the schools and things like that in the, I think, what, the 60s, and how hostile that was for a little child to go, her and the others to go into these schools while we weren't met with like dogs and, white parents that were out there protesting and telling us that we couldn't be there. The racism that we were met with was a lot more covert, in ways that made me really relate to the show Everybody Hates Chris. And if you have not watched it, definitely check it out. But it showed how he went to a school that was predominantly white, and the crazy things sometimes the teachers would say, or the assumptions that are made, or even like the bullying that he dealt with from white students, and the assumptions that are made about Black folks, right? And so I originally felt okay about it. It didn't really hit me that I was different until I got a little older. And by older, I'm saying like second or third grade. And yeah, it was interesting, right? Because at home, I was considered white, right? In my Black neighborhood and my Black family, I was considered white, right? Because of the way that I spoke, because I went to school with white people, different things like that, right? And, and because I cared about school and because I was smart. And so it was just this othering that constantly happened and that has been there throughout my life. And then it was this othering at school where I was too Black, right? After a while, I was too Black for the white kids and the white teachers and things like that, and dealt with a slew of racist attacks and things like that throughout my tenure at Brentwood. And, it was just this marginalization where it's just like I didn't fit in kind of anywhere, which led to me just really going inward, and where I had to have a third space, right? And that third space became like my imagination and my inner world that was imaginative and creative And the only place that I felt like that person could come out was around my mother's family and around my mother, my great grandmother, my uncle, and things like that, where it was safe for me to be a bubbly Black girl. It was safe for me to be myself and to not be picked apart, right, for being hairy or for being kind and gentle and bubbly and not a fighter, right? And to not deal with racism and to uh, not be too white. All of these different things that just seem to really uh, make me not feel like it was okay to be myself. And yeah, so it was just like I had to have multiple consciousness, right? It wasn't just, I had to have survival skills in the Black community, I had to have survival skills in the white community, right? And in the Black community, based off of me talking, I mean, through even now, right, there are people that will question if I'm from St. Louis because of the way that I sound. And I used to go into this whole thing of like, my mother's from California, I sound like her. But it's like, nobody needs to know all of that in order to show me some respect or in order to believe that I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, right? There's not one way to be Black. We are not a monolith. We are not all the same, right? While there are a lot of things that are common amongst Black folks, we are not all the same. And so, and I am extremely pro Black, very much a womanist in so many ways, right? But it's dehumanized if it does not look a certain way to certain folks. And so in college, I was introduced to the works of Bell Hooks and the concept of home place, right? And it refers to our safe spaces. And while our homes should be that place, sometimes that's not the place that we can be our full selves, right? So that double consciousness, that place that we should be able to be ourselves and put down our guards and no longer code switch and do these other things, the place that I had was my great grandmother's house, and her name was Willa Mae. And she had a two-family flat, and it was, some people call it a duplex. And it was it was pretty small. It felt huge when I was a kid, right? And it was located on the north side of St. Louis, and I loved it there. I felt safe. I felt welcomed. I felt the ability to be myself and to create and to imagine um, and to play. And she fed me all kinds of different Southern cuisine, and some of it I liked, some of it I did not. But she lived above a woman named Mrs. Clay. And Miss Clay was an older Black lady, and I believe she was like a widow, and she owned the family flat, right? And so my grandmother rented from her for several years, and had raised like three or so generations in that home. And so she lived there the majority of my life until she died. Well, almost until she died. She moved out once my uncle died. But yeah, as an only child there, I learned how to entertain myself. I had a vast imagination. I played on my grandmother's dresser and played in her, her different greases that she had, and gloves and lace and makeup and combs and things like that. Um, there was also this like back room that my family kind of used as storage, where my mother had a couch that she had purchased that she was waiting on to use that was in there. And I had a great aunt that was a beautician, and she had some of her hair tools. I definitely got in trouble one time, right, because I went a little too far playing beautician, and I cut off my eyebrows, my eyelashes, and a few inches of my hair that did not go well with my mother. Um, and yeah, I did a lot of exploration at the house, and I played solitaire. and I played I Declare War by myself, where I would learn how to like flip the cards over simultaneously, like I was playing against computer, right? So back in the 90s, we had to figure stuff out, and we were not constantly entertained. There were no tablets. I mean, of course, we had like different games and things that existed, but yeah, I had to make something work with very little. And so I watched a lot of TV. I spent a lot of time around a lot of older folks. Um, I watched a lot of TV with my grandmother. That was our time together. She was usually either feeding me or we were watching, As the World Turns, Young and the Restless, The Price is Right. Um, and yeah, it was my safe space. It was the place that I could put down the burden of having to be perfect or having to be something that I wasn't. It was my safe space. It was my before care, after care. It was my daycare before I was able to go to school. And it was my everything. I felt nurtured. Um, I felt calm and cared for and safe. Um, and I think that that's something that everybody deserves at their house, but at least have some type of space, right? Where there is safety, where you can put those guards down, where you can be your full self. And yeah, that is the story from my childhood, right? So I had to exist in so many different ways for so many different people to please so many different people in order to survive. And so the cool part about being an adult is relearning that and shedding the weight of people pleasing, shedding the weight of having to exist in these different worlds and showing up as my most authentic self as much as possible. And so that has been my overall goal, has been to just show up as me, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it's in other professional settings, whether it's online. I'm showing up as my most authentic self. And so that's very important to me. And as an adult as well, it's very important for me to have a peaceful home environment. And I will do that by any means. And that's something that I work very hard for to not only foster that for my daughter, but also myself, right? Because that's something that we all deserve. So I want to be an example of it's okay to be your full self even in these other environments, right? So while we, have to do things to survive in certain moments, it's really important for your home to just feel like a place where you can exhale. Okay. So, segment three, a boundary that I recently set. Yeah, so like I said, with that company that I did that I was considering with the move, I decided to go with a white company. And the white company, unfortunately, was more expensive. And for anybody that has moved out of state, that that racks up, right? And so while I wanted to be able to save money, I could not let that go as far as how I was treated, right? And I know for certain that if that black owned company had been talking to a white woman, they never would have fixed their lips to say something like that to them. They never would have said, "Oh, I thought you were going to cook for us." I am not here for labor. Uh, Men are cool, some of them, but yeah, that's not my role. Just because I'm a black woman. And it was just another way that patriarchy, you know, shows up in our lives as black women, that people can feel so comfortable that we are paying for a service to say, "I thought you were going to cook for me." Okay. He was not doing me a favor. This was not a family member that was, going to do something, on my behalf. This was a transaction. I was a customer, and he lost a customer, right? And so after I sat with it over that weekend, I decided to send him a text message. I didn't say why or anything like that. I just said I decided that I'm going to go with another company. And so that's something that Black men are going to have to learn to address, right? That uh, they are benefactors of patriarchy. Even if they don't get the full benefits, they do benefit from it. And, as a way of, standing on business, I had to pay more money, but I was proud of myself for not cowering. I was proud of myself for not laughing it off and acting like everything was okay. So that's today's episode of Boundaries and Bullshit. Don't forget to send in your boundaries and bullshit to the official email, which is boundariesandbullshit@gmail.com. BOUNDARIESANDBULLSHXT@gmail.com.